right, good morning, everybody. This is the review for landmark cases of the Supreme Court. We are going to have a 15-question quiz tomorrow, and so this will help prepare you and get you ready for the quiz tomorrow. So every once in a while, there might be some students that are joining in. In the meantime, I might have to address that, but other than that, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and I will answer any questions. So let's get right to it. I'm going to share my screen and we will start out with Edmodo. All right, so as you can see here, my account got hacked today. So if you are talking to some of our other classmates, please share with them that they need to go to Edmodo to look for the new meeting room. And this will be the new meeting room until I get hacked again, and then I'll have to create a new one. So this way I can keep it the same every time until it gets abused. All right, so with that, let's go to our PowerPoint. So I'm going to share a new screen. Oops. And here we go. So before we get started, let's see, exit this view. I want to say, hold on, just, all right. So we will be going over laws, rule of law, types of law, sources of law. Next, we'll start that on Thursday, just giving you a preview. But let's get into the actual review for today. So, actually, yeah, we'll do this first. I'll go through the review questions. Nah, let's go through, actually, let me change my mind. Let me go back over a few some of the main ideas, and then we'll do the review questions. So, we understand that the Supreme Court is the highest court established in the land, and there are 9 justices, and they serve for life. All right, that's pictured up in that picture are all 9 justices with the recently appointed judge Kavanaugh at the time. Again, the only qualification they have is good behavior, and we can see that right there and to the left of the picture at the bottom, if they maintain good behavior. Now, most of these cases, all the cases usually that are heard at the Supreme Court level are appellate cases. All right, and so here's an example of Florida versus Georgia back in 1854 when they were suing each other over the border, what would then become the border of Florida and Georgia. All right, so now there's a certain pathway. We learned about this, but the trial courts into the appellate courts into the Supreme Courts, and it happens both on the state side and on the federal side. Now, in order for the courts to hear it, you need to know this. So the petition for writ of certiorari, all right, it's the only way they can get the information from a original case. So you must know what this is. Writ of certiorari, all right? This allows the lower courts to send all the information up to the appellate court or Supreme Court. So any courts that hear a prior case must file this in order to get the information from one court to the next. All right, let's go to, all right. So each of the different cases, these are important and for what each one is about. All right, Marbury versus Madison gave us what's called judicial review. Judicial review is that they can declare laws unconstitutional. Secondly, it also declared that we know that the Constitution declares the Supreme Court as the supreme, or the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. And therefore, the Supreme Court, being that they interpret laws, they have the highest authority as far as legal, being able to determine what's laws and what's not. Again, we know that the legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch enforces laws or executes laws, and again, the judicial branch interprets the laws. But where did they get their power? It came from this case, Marbury versus Madison. All right, and the concept of judicial review. You must know what judicial review is. All right, then we go into what are called the 14th Amendments cases. And these are Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus the Board of Education. All right. Again, I gave you much more detailed in the review of the PowerPoint. So if you want to watch that, you'll get a much more detailed run through of these. But just simply, Plessy versus Ferguson okayed segregation, meaning that whites and blacks could be in separate areas as long as they both had the same thing. Now, when it came to education, this didn't work the same way. All right. You have a white school and you have a black school, and the education levels weren't the same. So there were several cases that were all happening about the same time. So they ended up picking, the Supreme Court picked the one of them. They picked Brown versus the Board of Education. So Brown said, we live in the neighborhood of a white school. We want to go to that school. They were saying, no, we're busing you to a colored school. They end up suing. They win because the Supreme Court saw that the education system was not the same. Therefore, they began to look at things and realize that segregation was not creating equality. And so they overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. So the way these two work, you got to understand. First off, you've got Plessy versus Ferguson legalizing segregation, the separation of the colors. Then you get Brown versus the Board of Education, which X's Plessy versus Ferguson, says no more segregation. Now we must begin to move forward. And this is what ultimately becomes the civil rights movement. All right. Our next, we have one last, in re Galt is one of these weird cases because it falls between so many, because they violated this kid's rights on so many levels. All right. So as you can see on this slide, not only did he not get due process, which is a 14th Amendment, he also didn't get the 5th and the 6th Amendments, which are, I think, the next cases we're going to talk about. So this is a great lead in between our 4th through 8th Amendments and our 14th Amendment cases. So teenager, kid, do they have the same rights as an adult? Well, before this case, no, they didn't. You didn't need to. You could arrest them without parental permission. You could try them. You didn't have to give them a lawyer. They're just a kid. They don't know any better. But they sued and won because equality is across the board. So if you're going to treat adults the same way, you have to give kids the same rights. They have to have due process. They have to have a lawyer present. They have to be able to talk to the person that's accusing them. All right. So all these things were a part of this in re Galt. And you might, if you didn't listen to the first one, why do they say in re Galt instead of Galt versus something? Because it's a teenager. The cases are a kid. Someone under the age of 18, they don't work the same way. Adult rights and kid rights are a little different, but again, the main thing is that equality is still equality across the board, right? Whether you can drink as an adult or vote, certain things not everybody can do, but you can still be equal. All right, so that gets through our 14th amendments. And at that point, I'm going to open it up for any questions on our introduction and Marbury versus Madison and our 14th Amendment cases. Any questions?
No.
All right, if no further questions, I will continue. So we're going to move then into our our First Amendment cases. That's right. So these were two high school or school related cases. So the first one is Tinker versus Des Moines. So as you can see in the picture, that little armband is what they were wearing, and they tied it around their muscle, their bicep, and they were wearing it at school. Now, as you can look at their appearance, they look very nice. They weren't, dressed in torn clothes and stuff, but they saw that this armband, or the school said it's not protected by free speech. Supreme Court said, yes, it is. So here, free speech is given to students. So free speech given to Tinker versus Des Moines, but then when we go to the next one, Hazelwood versus Coma, free speech is taken away from kids. Again, case real quickly, you have a school newspaper. They want to print a story on teenage pregnancy. The kids, the school says no because it's going to hurt the school. The kids say, hey, it's free speech. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, hey, you're a student in the school. If the school thinks it looks bad on them, they have the right to protect their free speech. So does that give the right to everybody? No. You can't just say what you want because of free speech. So it limited some things. So again, these are our two free speech, free speech cases. So any questions on the difference between these two? All right, again, you've got one, Tinker versus Des Moines gives free speech to students. Hazel versus Comer kind of takes away free speech from the students. All right, now that moves us into our 4 through 8. And these are the rights of the accused. So we'll start out with Gideon versus Wainwright. All right, lots of things happen in Florida. This is where this case originated. All right, so he didn't have a lawyer when he was arrested and tried. He got into jail. He found out, hey, I have rights, sued, won. Every person must have a lawyer present. All right, which gets us to the next case, Miranda versus Arizona. Remember in the very beginning last week, one of their first questions is, do you know you have the right to, and complete the sentence? And many of you said remain silent, because we've all heard this before. You hear it when you watch your police dramas, any court show, cop show, anything like that. You're going to hear this at some point. All right, this is the original case. Bad dude raped a woman, bad dude. However, he didn't have his rights given to him. All right, he didn't have a lawyer. He incriminated himself. He was mentally retarded, so he didn't even know he had the right to not incriminate himself. So eventually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and now we have this Miranda warning in the upper right corner, and this protected the rights of everybody who gets arrested. All right. Now, our next two cases are executive power cases. And before I do these, let me just open it up. Any questions between Gideon versus Wainwright or Miranda versus Arizona? Any questions on Gideon versus Wainwright or Miranda versus Arizona? Got a question?
No.
Nope. All right.
No.
All right, again, if you have a question, you can always raise your hand too. So back to our executive power. Now, we all know about Nixon, all right? He thinks he can do whatever he wants as a president because he's the president. Remember, if the president does it, it is not illegal. All right. So here he secretly recorded conversations in the White House. They say he must turn over the tapes. He says, no, it's executive privilege. He's allowed to do that because why? He's the president. Nope, you're not allowed to do it. Nobody is above the law. We know that. And we're going to hear that again when we talk about rule of law starting on Thursday again. We've talked about it once before, but we're going to just review it on Thursday. So, United States made Nixon turn over the tapes. And in doing so, he resigned because he knew that there was too much evidence against him. The next case is a very strange case. And once again, it happens in Florida, where most crazy things happen. So real quickly, there's a ballot. All right, let me stop the share for just a moment. So here I've got, let's say, you're looking at my screen. I've got a picture of my first period attendance. But imagine that each one of these check marks were a punch, where I'd have to punch a hole in. So that's what was happening with these particular ballots. So let me get back to my slide here. So you have these ballots that are not getting punched out, and they're called hanging chads. It's a chad, that little thing that punches out, and it's hanging, meaning it's still attached to the paper. So they were supposed to come completely out. So you know, like where you draw in the circle on a bubble sheet, imagine pushing that bubble all the way through the paper until it goes away. That wasn't happening. So there's all these ballots, they're not sure what they mean. So they're going to have to manually count each one of these ballots to say it was either for Gore, for Bush, or you can't tell. The Supreme Court steps in and says, no. A ballot cast is that you cannot go back and try to figure out what the people were thinking when they voted. So Gore was suing, he lost. Bush won, and they stopped the recount and gave him the presidency. So that's that one's kind of a little confusing, but just as long as you understand that the main idea is they stopped a recount to award a presidential election. Now, the last one we'll just include here because it deals with strictly the Second Amendment. It's the only one that deals with the right to bear arms. So it's Heller versus the District of Columbia. But this is unique because if you look at the way the case ended, it was a 5-4 decision. Now, this is the way most cases end up. All the other ones up till now have been much higher majorities. Here's a case you can see who determines how a vote's going to go by who's in control of the Supreme Court. So in a conservative, Republican-controlled Supreme Court, obviously the right to bear arms, being that it's an issue that Republicans believe in, they're going to support it and say, yes, you can have a gun in your home to defend yourself. And that's what the case was all about. The 4 liberal judges voted against it. So as the court changes power, this changes the ability of the court to render decisions based upon different principles. So let me open it up one more time. I'll stop the share again at this point and see if there's any questions. We've gone through all the cases now. Are there any questions on any of the cases?
Nope.
No.
All right, so let's move on to our review PowerPoint then. So let's get back to my slideshow. And here we go. Oops. So I have, where's all right. So I'm going to unmute everybody. Which of the following is the power to say whether any federal, state, or local law or government action goes against the Constitution? Anybody can just shout it out. A, judicial review, B, judicial interpretation, C, Supreme Court review, D, veto power.
A.
A, judicial review. All right, next question. How many justices must vote to hear a Supreme Court case? 2
D.
out of 9, 3 out of 9, 4 out of 9, or 5 out of 9?
D.
Here's your clue. All right, how many fingers do you have?
D.
No, we have 4 fingers, 1 thumb. 4 fingers is how many judges? It is C, 4 out of 9. All right, so just a little trick. Think 4 fingers. That might help you. All right, Justice Marshall established in his laws of judicial review that the Constitution was which of the following? Supreme law of the land, flexible and open to interpretation, to be read carefully, or amendable?
Constitution was what?
Anybody? Nobody knows this? The Constitution, our governing document.
What?
Does it change?
O.
No. So it's not
A.
flexible and open. A, it's the supreme law of the land. And another way to remind yourself of this, what court is it? It's the Supreme Court. Why? Because it's the top. Supreme law, same idea. The Constitution is the top document in the United States. All right. Yes, it is supreme law of the land. Here we go. Which of the following is filed when a Supreme Court asks to review a decision of a lower court? Summary judgment, court order, petition for writ of certiorari, or judicial review? What is the one thing we talked about that the courts must fill out in order
C.
to read? C, the writ of certiorari. Now, one thing I want you to, I want to show you 2 things off of these last 2 slides. First off, on this one, the difference between a conservative judge and a liberal judge is this answer B, flexible and open to interpretation. All right. When the judges use the Constitution, if it's 100% in the Constitution, most people say that's not open to interpretation. Liberal judges tend to say, well, the Constitution says this, but I think it means this. Get what I'm saying? It's not quite the same way. They change the Constitution. So the way our forefathers established the Constitution was that it wouldn't be changed, that it couldn't be open to interpretation. It was meant to specifically say one thing. Now, the second thing I want to draw to your is the answer A, summary judgment. Now, it's something you need to know about. We're going to probably talk about a little bit more with the laws, but a summary judgment means, remember, they take the petition, the writ of certiorari, they look at the case, then they decide whether or not they want to review the case further and let the lawyers come. If they don't, if they look at the case and say, "Ooh, we found a mistake, we're just going to do a summary judgment." What that means, they render a verdict based upon what they've read. They don't have to hear any new presentation. Right? And then so sometimes this is something that is used often. Whoa, 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 whoa. All right. Whoa. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. I will open it up once I ask the next question. All right, so anyway, again, the petition is the thing that they have to fill out in order to get, to be able to look at something that happens at a lower court. All right, our next one is Congress proposes an amendment legalizing an income tax. The Supreme Court rules that the income tax is unconstitutional. These events illustrate the use of which of the following? What is the term that allows them to declare something unconstitutional? Is that delegated power, check and balance, judicial legislation, or unwritten constitution? Let me unmute everybody again. What is that?
B.
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 Yeah,
B.
it is B, checks and balances. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Which case would most likely be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court? Now, think about what we said, their jurisdiction. All right. Do they have jurisdiction to stop construction of a new highway near an elementary school, an appeal of a murder conviction, a case in which a defendant's rights are denied and the case is further appealed, or a case in which there is a hung jury?
B.
B.
All right, so we got B. Does anyone think of anything else?
No.
What was that? Is that a B or a D?
Mm.
Wow, let's see what it says here. It's actually C.
Mm.
Now, one of the things that's the clue in this question is the idea of rights. All right, so let me go back real quick to our slideshow and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Here we go. Lower right corner of this slide. Most Supreme Court cases deal with rights. All right, so majority of the cases, obviously there's other cases, but majority of the cases deal with rights.
Right.
All right, so that's the clue in that particular question. I don't think that question's on the quiz because it's not everybody's going to understand that, but I want you to just at least know it for future instances so that you understand rights is what Supreme Court cases usually deal with. All right, oops, that one went too early. Which case extended the 14th Amendment's right of equal protection under the law? Yes, it is Brown versus Board of Education. All right. Now, what this means is that equal protection was the students receiving equality? No, they were receiving a less of an education, meaning they're not being protected the same. All right. Which Supreme Court case resulted in what was known as the separate but equal doctrine? Make sure we're unmuted. All right. Which one is separate but equal?
A.
A, definitely. Plessy versus Ferguson. Very good. All right. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate education facilities are inherently unequal. Brown versus the Board of Education. Which constitutional idea was the basis for the Supreme Court's decision? All right, is it protection against double jeopardy, equal protection of the law, freedom of speech, or right of assembly? What do we think? Can type it in the box too. That B1, that's at the right time. Yep, it is equal protection of the law. All right, which headline best illustrates judicial review? All right, now, clue, you want to look for the word unconstitutional because that's what judicial review declares. Do you see that anywhere?
C.
That's right. All right, the Supreme Court decisions in Gideon versus Wainwright and Miranda versus Arizona have been criticized because these rulings decided which of the following. What did they give rights to? Expanded the rights of the accused, granted more powers to federal judges, lengthened prison sentences for the guilty, reinstated the use of capital punishment.
I think.
Think about it. Who are these guys? Gideon, all right? What was his case? Miranda, what was his case? Are these good guys? Are these bad guys? Are these judges? Who are these people?
Mm-mm.
Someone
A.
can type. Hey, all right, very good. Expanded the rights. Again, what do these cases mostly deal with? People's rights. All right, that's the first clue. Secondly, is it the accused? All right. Most people would say, you know, hey, you're guilty and then you have to prove yourself innocent. No, that's not the way it works. Actually, we're innocent until proven guilty. And if you're accused of something, you need to have the right to be able to defend yourself and protect yourself. And these things weren't given to most criminals. So yes, it is A, expanded the rights of the accused. All right, let's see, how many more do we got here? All right, that was our last one. So let me look back over one last thing. Now I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm actually going to look at the quiz itself. So I can just see if there's any questions that we didn't cover in the review. All right, let's see. All right. In this case, a teenager was denied his due process rights to a lawyer, to call witnesses, and to confront his accuser. Which case is that? I'm not going to tell you the choices. You got to tell me the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a teenager denied due process, lawyer, witnesses, confront his accuser. Which case is that? Yes, Juan, you're right. Galt. Very good. All right, let's see. We talked about that case. All right, we did that one. All right, because of this case, police have to notify you of your right to remain silent and a lawyer if you have been arrested for a crime. Which case is that one?
Miranda versus Ferguson.
Miranda versus Arizona.
I'm in Arizona.
Yeah, that's good. That's close enough. You got it. All right, we talked about that one. We talked about that one. All right, here we go. This case set the precedent that students have First Amendment rights to free speech, which is more than just words. Free speech, more than just words.
It's like the case they had like the band they would wear on their bicep.
Right, which case is that? I need the name. Anyone? Jose, you have a question? You have an answer?
Hmm?
Do you have an answer or a question?
No.
Neither.
No.
Okay. All right. That was Tinker versus Des Moines. Remember, free speech. Tinker, more than words, but Coma versus Hazelwood, that's the one that takes away free speech. All right. If I said Second Amendment case, you would say? Second Amendment case? The last one we talked about. You got to make sure you know this. District of Columbia versus Heller. And we talked about that one. talked about that one, and we covered that one. All right, looks like we covered everything you need to know for the quiz tomorrow. So if you have any problems, go back over this video. I'll be posting it in a little bit. And then, or you can look over the PowerPoint video, or just look over the questions at the end of the PowerPoint. Tomorrow, you'll be taking your quiz, and if you bombed the short quiz on Friday, I will give you just, once you're done, I'll put this in the notes for directions for tomorrow, but once you're done, then message me, and I will release your the 5-question quiz so that you can redo that one also tomorrow too. So other than that, you guys have a great rest of your day. I will open it up to any last questions from anybody. If not, I will see you guys tomorrow. Any questions?
No.